behaviour is often the second most cited reason for teachers leaving the profession. And I don't believe it has to be like that. And I think that one of the mistake, I'm going to call it mistake, I'm going to dare to call it a mistake. One of the mistakes that I hear in the rhetoric when we're talking about behaviour is that there's this way to do it. Often that gets tied in with things like zero tolerance or discipline or routines, and those are all debatable things themselves. But that idea that there's a way to do behaviour, it just doesn't make any sense to me, because surely, I've thought about this quite a lot, surely if there was one way to do behaviour, then we'd have sorted it out by now. Behaviour is this ever evolving area, issue in schools, in education, and it's gonna keep changing because it's all to do with the particular pupil that you have in front of you. It's to do with you, it's to do with your relationship between you and that pupil, and then times that by 33 for your class, and then put all of that into the context of your particular school, and then put that into the context of your particular community, and then how about we put that into the context of global events? All of these things affect us because we're human. And that is why a set of rules that are completely rigid and solid do not work for the long term, and they do not work for all of our pupils. Zero tolerance may work for some pupils at some times in their life, in a certain context, on a blue moon, because it's one approach and it may work for some people, but that does not work for everyone. And so it's a very media savvy thing to say as well. Look, zero tolerance is working in our schools, look at our grades, look at our lack of behaviour issues, but they don't say look at the 10 people we excluded this year. What's happened to those pupils, and how have their families been affected, and how have the other students been affected by that? There is a difference between compliance and learning. I can walk into a classroom and I can, if I just look, I can think this teacher's, they're really in control of this class. There's zero tolerance here, the behaviour is brilliant. But that doesn't necessarily mean that the pupils are engaged. It doesn't necessarily mean they're learning. It could mean, with some of the kids I work with, they're scared. The colleagues that I've worked with in those organisations, they get that pupils are individuals, and therefore their approach to creating the type of culture that is based on things like emotional safety it's just second nature to teachers and teaching staff who work in pre's and APs. If you don't help a child feel safe and emotionally safe, and if you don't support a positive culture in your classroom, then the kid who's experienced trauma, abuse, neglect, or who still is experiencing some of those things, they're going to kick off, and they're going to definitely let you know about it if you're not getting those safety boundaries right. I mean, the relationships, there's space and time to know your kids, and guess what, when you have a good relationship with someone, if you then ask them to do something they're a bit scared of, like reading aloud when they're 16 and they've got a reading age of 8, but if you've formed a strong enough, positive enough relationship, and you've made them feel safe in the classroom with their peers and in the culture of the school, then they're going to dare to take that risk, and they're going to dare to take the academic risks as well that they wouldn't feel safe enough to do in mainstream. First of all, I ask a teacher or teaching assistant that I'm supporting to unpick what do you mean by low level disruption, because it's kind of washed about as a big term as if we all know what it is, but it is different in each classroom. So is it that the entire class, for example, can't do a silent task when needed? Or is it that actually there's 5 out of 33 that always start to kind of stir things around? Or is it that after lunch you get this low level disruption? And is that because there hasn't been a transition activity in between the lunchtime and the fight that went on, or the big snogging fest or whatever, to help us get pupils in a place ready to learn? And there are lots of tips that I could give on this. One of my top ones is around the check-in. So you're doing the register, and I do not need to hear, yes, miss, times 33. That's quite boring. Not a great use of my time. So what I do instead is I ask my pupils to just give me one word to describe how they're doing that day. And if you're working with teenagers especially, you will get a lot of tired, bored, okay, fine. But if you keep that going, lesson upon lesson, week upon week, you start to get to know the mood of that class, how ready they are to work each time. And as you go over the weeks and months, you then start getting quite nuanced with them, and you're building up your knowledge of these young people, and then you can adapt your learning for it. We do not need demon headmasters traipsing the corridors, because what that does is it undermines every other single teacher in their classroom trying to do what they can the best. And I've unfortunately experienced this lots of times myself. I know lots of people have, where you've approached a situation with behaviour with a child, and it's working or it's not, but you're working it out together. You're building that relationship with the young person, because it's the teacher who's got to continually teach in that way. And then if a leadership person comes in and does the classic rah, rah, huff and puff, then great. The kid, and we go back to that idea of zero tolerance thing, the kid may comply for that 5 minutes or with that leadership member, but that doesn't change the culture of the classroom. That does not change the relationship that the teacher then has with the young person. Because kids can smell a mile off if the teacher in front of them can't control them. And if they've got any feeling or sense that this teacher in front of them has to call for help, then they know straight away that they can work around that teacher. So any support a leader does has to go via having a conversation with the staff. Where are you having difficulties? What's the kind of support that you need? Spend a day, I know it's a full day, but if you can, spend a day and surreptitiously follow one of your kids that is known for their negative behaviour. Don't tell the kid because they'll get completely put off. Just be an adult in the room who follows that pupil and see what school is like from their eyes. And that 9 times out of 10 will give you all your answers you need in how to better support your behaviour across your school. That school that I was working in had fostered a culture of, we're allowed to have different emotions. That's allowed, and we can understand. We don't necessarily have to condone and say that's all right. There are consequences, but there was this just massive compassion and understanding between the pupils and the teachers, and therefore you can hold that. But if you go into a classroom saying this is the only way you're allowed to be, this is the way you're allowed to not be, you're setting yourself up for a fall. If we're putting on somebody else's approaches, it's like putting on someone else's jacket. It just doesn't feel right. And so we have to take the strategies and approaches and embody them for ourselves. And guess what? The way I do that is going to look very different to the way that you do that. And that's okay, because there's so many different types of pupils out there, and they need different types of educators and role models so that they can also aspire and know that there's difference available in our world.